They say divorce brings out the worst in people, but I never thought I'd hear him say that. Standing there in front of the judge, lawyers, and strangers, he smirked like he'd already won. "You're like a packhorse, easy to ride." That's what he threw at me, loud enough to echo across the courtroom. My breath caught in my throat. I'd prepared for legal arguments, but not that level of humiliation. In that moment, I wasn't a woman in a trial. I was reduced to an object. He thought I would crumble. He thought I would stay broken. But what he didn't realize is that I had already rehearsed my silence. Not because I was weak, but because I had planned this. My silence was my answer. I looked him in the eye and smiled, the kind of smile that isn't about joy, but power. Underneath my oversized coat was a deep emerald dress I hadn't worn since before I was his wife. I took it off slowly, letting that courtroom see me, not as his possession, but as a woman reclaiming herself. He never saw it coming. That was the turning point. All the years I'd shrunk myself to fit into his shadow ended in that second. He betrayed me again and again, chipped away at my self-worth, and still, he thought I would stay. But I was done carrying his burdens. I was done playing the obedient mule in his parade. The truth came out not through my voice, but through my presence. And for the first time, he looked scared. I remembered all the nights she cried in silence, the version of me that begged for his affection while he rolled his eyes, the woman who believed I was nothing to him, because that's how he made me feel. And now here I was, turning that pain into dignity. The judge raised her eyebrows. His lawyer shifted awkwardly. I felt it in the room. No one expected me to rise, but I did, because I'm not who I was when he broke me first. What people don't talk about is how emotional abuse doesn't leave bruises, but it bruises your soul. It makes you doubt your instincts, your value, your worth. And still, nobody believed her. They thought I had it all. A home, a husband, a life. But that life was a performance. He controlled the script, and I was just the actress, nodding through betrayal. I was deceived, but I rewrote the ending. The truth is, she planned it all. Every step leading up to that day, I documented every insult. I gathered receipts, bank statements, the hidden messages I found when I finally checked his phone. I found the messages, the ones he swore didn't exist. He flirted, lied, sent money, and erased his trail, except he forgot I was watching, quietly, steadily, like someone preparing for a storm. I wasn't going to give him a scene. No screaming, no chaos. That's what he wanted. He thrived off humiliation, especially mine. But this time, she exposed him without even speaking. And oh, the irony, when the woman you mocked uses your arrogance as her evidence. So I showed him the proof of his manipulation, his betrayal, his games. My lawyer didn't even have to say much. My presence spoke volumes. I used to think revenge was fire and fury, but sometimes it's just grace under pressure. It's refusing to let them see you break. It's knowing exactly what they did and still standing taller. I didn't need to scream because the room did it for me. The looks, the silence, the discomfort. That day, he begged her to come back, not with words, but with his eyes, desperate, unbelieving, and I walked away. That courtroom became my stage, not for drama, but rebirth. I felt like I was shedding layers of shame with every step I took. He mocked me, but his words became his downfall. He didn't realize that calling me a packhorse only revealed how long he'd been riding on my strength. And now, that strength wasn't his to use anymore. That was my moment, and I seized it. And yet, even as I stepped out into the corridor, dress flowing and head high, I knew this wasn't the end. Because healing doesn't happen in a single courtroom or a single day. No, what came next required me to rebuild everything. And just when I thought I was alone, something completely unexpected happened. I left the courthouse with fire in my chest and nothing but a sketch pad in my purse. That pad had been my secret world for years. Drawings I made in the quiet moments between his insults. While he mocked, I created. While he betrayed me, I poured emotion onto paper. I never thought those sketches would lead to anything, but after the trial, I posted one, just one, on social media. It exploded. Messages poured in. People saw something real in my work, something raw. That's when the email came. A woman from a wealthy family reached out, asking if I'd consider painting her father's portrait. I almost said no. I wasn't ready, but something inside me whispered. She finally left. Now it's time to begin. I showed up with trembling hands and a heart still patching itself together. Her father sat in a massive chair by the window, his eyes clouded by time, but filled with warmth. As I painted, he asked about my life. I told him just enough to be honest, but not enough to cry. A week later, I took the bus home. It was raining, the kind of rain that makes everything feel cinematic. An old man struggled with his cane, so I stood up, offered my seat, and helped him off. He smiled like he'd known me forever. I didn't know his name, but something about him felt important. Turns out, he was Calvin Crossman, a legendary lawyer whose name once carried the weight of justice itself. And though dementia had dulled his memory, his instincts were still sharp. We became unlikely friends. He'd invite me over, share tea and stories I barely believed. He talked about betrayal in courtrooms, secrets behind polished doors, and how silence can be both shield and sword. I listened, absorbing his wisdom like sunlight. One day he looked at me and said, "You have the eyes of someone who's seen too much, but still chooses beauty." I didn't cry, but I almost did, because somehow he saw me, not as a victim, not as a tool, but as an artist with purpose. Through Calvin, I met his family. That's how I crossed paths with Stella, his daughter-in-law. At first, she was sweet, too sweet. I've learned to trust the quiet gut feeling that whispers when something's off. She smiled with her mouth, but never her eyes. And every time I visited, she hovered, curious about what I knew, what I'd heard. One day, Calvin whispered, "She's hiding something." And that's all it took. The artist in me became a detective overnight. He asked me for a favor, to place a small camera inside her office. I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I was crossing a line or protecting someone who mattered. But then I remembered, he broke me first. I owed it to myself to stop letting others dictate right and wrong in my life. So, I did it. I planted the camera, quietly, strategically. My hands shook, but my heart said yes, because sometimes intuition isn't paranoid, it's prophetic. The footage was chilling. Stella wasn't just unkind, she was dangerous. She was planning something sinister with a man who wasn't her husband. They spoke in code, but the message was clear. Manipulation, fraud, betrayal. Stories of betrayal don't always look like bruises. Sometimes they're written in whispered conversations and hidden bank transfers. She planned it all, and now I had proof. I couldn't believe I was back in the middle of someone else's mess. But this time, I wasn't the pawn. I was the wild card. I was deceived before, but never again. I watched the footage with a heavy heart, knowing this could tear a family apart. But the truth came out, and once it does, it never goes back in. Calvin deserved to know, and I was the only one who could make that happen. Funny how life works. I thought my divorce would be the end of my story, but it became the beginning of my purpose. Art, honesty, and the courage to act. These weren't just traits, they were tools I never knew I had. He thought I would stay small, but I grew. I grew in silence, in strength, in clarity. And now, I wasn't just surviving, I was connecting, creating, and making moves that scared people like Stella. But just when I thought things couldn't spiral further, the footage I captured set off a chain of events no one saw coming. One moment I was painting portraits, the next, I was witnessing a crime unfold before my eyes. I never imagined I'd be hiding cameras and decoding conversations, but betrayal changes you. It sharpens your senses. Calvin's warning stayed in my mind like a song on loop. She's hiding something. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia, but then I caught Stella watching me when she thought I wasn't looking. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, and every time Calvin forgot something, she looked more relieved than concerned. That's when I knew. She planned it all, and I needed to know why. I set up the camera late one afternoon, pretending to deliver a framed sketch. My hands were steady, but my chest felt like a war drum. I placed it behind a decorative vase in her office. Perfect view of the desk. I told myself this was for Calvin's protection, but deep down, I also needed to prove I wasn't crazy. I was deceived once, and I refused to walk blindly again. My silence was my answer. Let her think I didn't suspect a thing. For days, I waited. The footage trickled in slowly. Stella met with someone, a man who wasn't her husband. Their voices were hushed, but clear. They talked about bank accounts, inheritance, and how much longer Calvin might live. My stomach twisted. She cried, in silence when others were around, playing the role of dutiful daughter-in-law. But behind closed doors, she was ruthless, cold, strategic, a woman on a mission. The worst part? Nobody believed her capable of this. Stella had crafted her image so well. Even Michael, her husband, was blind to it. That's the thing about stories of betrayal. They don't always come with warnings. Sometimes they wear pearls and host dinner parties. I knew if I brought this up too soon, it would backfire. He never saw it coming, and I wasn't going to let the same thing happen to Calvin. I compiled every clip, every whisper, every sideways glance. I watched the recordings at night, sometimes crying without realizing it. Not because I was afraid, but because it was all too familiar. The lies, the manipulation, the slow unraveling of trust. He betrayed me, and now I was watching someone else get betrayed right in front of me. But this time, I could do something. I wasn't powerless anymore. The day I showed Calvin the footage, his eyes welled up. He didn't say much, just nodded, slowly, as if a storm had finally made landfall. He looked so small in that moment, but not weak. No, there was steel in his gaze. She exposed him as vulnerable, thinking she could control everything. But Calvin still had fight in him, and now, he had me. We weren't just uncovering lies. We were preparing for battle. What we didn't expect was Michael's reaction. When he saw the footage, he went silent, pale. He watched his wife conspiring with another man, stealing from his family, talking about clean exits. Then he whispered, "I trusted her with everything. I knew that pain. It's the kind that cuts without bleeding, the kind that makes you question who you are." I was nothing to him. That phrase hit me all over again, but this time it wasn't my heartbreak. It was his. Michael asked me one question: "What do we do now?" That's when I realized we were all just survivors trying to outlive the people who tried to ruin us. I told him we needed a plan, not revenge, truth. Because the moment the truth came out, there would be no turning back. It had to be clean, irrefutable, and final. We set everything in motion, but timing, as always, had a mind of its own. Just when we thought we were ready to confront Stella, she made her move first. One act of desperation that nearly cost everything. I thought I'd seen the worst betrayal could offer, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. I couldn't sleep that night. My hands were shaking as I replayed the footage over and over, trying to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. Stella wasn't just cheating on Michael. She was orchestrating something far darker. In the video, she talked about removing the old man like he was a piece of furniture. I sat there, frozen, barely breathing. She planned it all. That phrase echoed in my head, louder with each second. I didn't want to believe it, but the truth came out whether I was ready or not. Michael arrived early the next morning, face drawn with worry. I didn't say a word at first. My silence was my answer. I simply pressed play and watched the blood drain from his face. He blinked fast, his jaw clenched, and then he whispered, "She's going to kill my father." For once he wasn't trying to fix anything. He was terrified, and rightfully so. He never saw it coming. None of us did. The betrayal was layered, poisonous, and deadly. We rushed to Calvin's house, hoping, praying we weren't too late. As we pulled up, something felt off. The front door was cracked open, swaying gently. Michael bolted inside, and I followed, behind. What we found made my stomach twist. Calvin was slumped on the floor, barely conscious, bleeding from a stab wound. Stella was nowhere in sight. It felt like a nightmare unraveling in real time. He broke me first, I thought, thinking of William. But this was beyond emotional wounds. This was murder. Michael called 911, and I did what I could to slow the bleeding. My scarf became a tourniquet, and my shaking hands tried to hold his life together. "Hang in there," I kept whispering. I'd only known Calvin for weeks, yet in that moment he felt like family, and I was terrified of losing him. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice and survival. I could see it now. She cried in silence once, maybe, but she turned her pain into cruelty. And now Calvin was paying the price. When the police arrived, I handed them the footage. One officer watched it in silence, nodding slowly. "We'll find her," he said, his voice tight. I believed him. Stella had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The woman who once smiled sweetly at family dinners had become something else entirely. When she was captured, the neighborhood buzzed with disbelief. Nobody believed her at first, until the video surfaced. Then the masks fell. The whispers started. Stories of betrayal spread like wildfire. At the station, Stella snapped. She screamed about Calvin, how he ruined everything. That's when it all came out. Her father had once stood trial for financial fraud, and Calvin, then a top defense attorney, refused to take the case. "He destroyed my family," she spat. "Now I destroyed his." It was twisted, but it made sense in a way that chilled me. I was deceived. We all were. She had worn the costume of kindness so perfectly, but the monster underneath had waited years to strike. Calvin survived, barely. He spent a week in the ICU, then began to speak again, softly, then clearer each day. "I always had a bad feeling about her," he whispered to me once, but I ignored it. I thought I was just getting old. His eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, I saw the weight of guilt in a man who once seemed untouchable. I held his hand and said, "It's not your fault," because it wasn't. She exposed him to a pain no one saw coming, but he lived. That mattered. Michael never left his father's side, not once. I watched him break, then rebuild, piece by piece. Sometimes, justice starts in the most violent ways, but what followed was healing, a strange kind, the kind that begins with blood, but ends with truth. I still remember the look on Michael's face when Stella was sentenced. He didn't smile, he didn't cry, he just exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath for years. Betrayal can do that. It locks you inside yourself until the moment you're finally free. As for me, I walked away from the courtroom with a strange mix of peace and fury. Calvin squeezed my hand and whispered, "Now it's your turn." I nodded. I knew exactly what he meant. I hadn't forgotten William. I hadn't forgotten how he mocked me, humiliated me, tried to destroy me, and now I had everything I needed, so I showed him the proof. The next time I stood in court, I wouldn't be a woman broken by a man. I'd be the one handing down the verdict. And it started with one move, walking back into that courtroom, not as a victim, but as someone ready to burn it all down with truth. And as I opened that door again, heels clicking against the tile, I I smiled, because deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. If anything, it was the beginning of my rise. And what came next? Well, let's just say he thought I would stay silent forever. The courtroom looked different this time, or maybe I did. I wasn't trembling in worn-out shoes or hiding behind cheap suits anymore. This time, I walked in tall, chin high, with Calvin by my side, his presence like armor. William sat across, the room smug as ever, but I saw it in his eyes, the unease. He didn't know what was coming. He thought I would stay broken, but I had evidence. I had allies. And most of all, I had the strength I never knew I was allowed to claim. The judge raised an eyebrow when I handed over the folder. Inside, bank, transfers, hidden accounts, fake signatures, all traced back to William. I didn't flinch. I didn't explain. I let the paper speak, so I showed him the proof. The courtroom fell quiet. William's lawyer leaned in, whispering furiously, his face flushed, hands twitching. And then William laughed, loudly. "She's lying," he said, but even his voice cracked, because the truth came out, whether he liked it or not. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. My silence had always been my weapon. My silence was my answer to every insult, every slap of his words. But now, that silence had transformed into documents, testimonies, allies, and a judge who was watching everything with sharp eyes. Calvin sat in the front row, arms crossed, a living symbol of credibility. The same man who'd once been mocked for being senile was now the one giving weight to my words. When William tried to interrupt, the judge shut him down. "You've had your say. Now, it's her turn." Oh, how the tables turned. The hobby's same man who once called me a packhorse, mocked my body, and paraded his affair like a trophy, was now being exposed, piece by piece. He betrayed me, and now everyone saw it. Every hidden wire transfer, every manipulated signature, every time he pretended I was crazy, it all unraveled in front of him. Then came the witness, our old financial advisor. He hesitated before stepping up, then cleared his throat and confessed, "Yes." William pressured him to forge. Yes, he knew it was illegal, but he was scared. "She didn't know," he said, looking at me. "She was just trusting. I was deceived. Again and again. But that's what predators count on. Your goodness, your belief in loyalty. They feed off it, until one day you feed them their own medicine." The judge leaned back, tapped her pen against the desk, and sighed. "It's very clear what happened here." I held my breath. "You siphoned funds. You misled your wife. And now, you'll face the consequences." That word, consequences, hit me like sunlight after years in the dark. Because for so long, I thought there would never be any, that I'd carry all the weight while he walked free. But now, the scales tipped. Justice didn't whisper. It thundered. The courtroom erupted when the judgment was read. William's assets? Seized. His accounts? Frozen. The house he tried to steal from me? Returned. But even more than the legal win, it was his face, that twisted, shocked look as reality slammed into him. He never saw it coming. He thought I'd crumble, that I'd hide, that I'd settle. But no, she finally left. And when she came back, she came with receipts, resolve, and a storm. Outside the courthouse, Calvin hugged me. "You did it," he said. "No," I whispered. "We did. Because healing never happens alone. Sometimes it starts with someone who believes in you more than you believe in yourself. And sometimes it takes a courtroom to close a chapter. But don't be mistaken. This wasn't the end. This was the moment I took the pen back and started writing my version of the story. William shouted at the reporters, calling me a liar, a manipulator. But they didn't listen. They didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than his desperation. He begged her to come back, but not because he loved her, because he feared her power. And I finally understood, revenge isn't loud. It's not chaos. It's quiet, graceful, and undeniable. It's when the one you broke returns and rebuilds in front of your eyes. And just when I thought the chapter had closed, a soft voice behind me asked, "Olivia?" I turned, and there stood Michael, eyes tender, a rose in hand. "You ready for a new beginning?" he asked. And just like that, my heart skipped. Because even after betrayal, even after the courtroom battles, something beautiful waited in the wings. And what came next? Well, that's a story of its own. I didn't expect love. Not after everything. Not after being shattered into 1,000 pieces and gluing myself back together one splinter at a time. But there he was, Michael. Gentle eyes, a quiet strength, the kind of presence that didn't try to outshine but stood steady beside me. After years of walking on eggshells, his steadiness felt like peace. And when he said, "You deserve more than survival," I believed it. He broke me first. But Michael helped me remember what healing felt like. We started slow. Coffee on park benches. Walks that turned into talks that turned into laughter I thought I'd forgotten how to make. I told him stories of betrayal, of the nights she cried in silence, of how he thought I would stay even after everything. Michael never rushed me, never tried to fix me. He just listened. Really listened. And that That was the most unexpected gift of all. He never looked at me like I was broken. Even when I showed him my scars, the financial ones, the emotional ones, the invisible ones, I never saw pity in his eyes, just admiration, respect, like he knew what it took to rise from that wreckage. He said, "Anyone can fall in love with someone polished. I fell for you while you were rebuilding." And that, right there, was when I realized I didn't need to prove anything anymore. The day he proposed, it wasn't flashy. No big audience, no theatrics, just us, on the porch of Calvin's lake house. "You've been through enough storms," he said. "Let's build a life full of calm." And I couldn't stop the tears. Not because I was sad, but because, for the first time, I felt safe enough to cry happy tears. Because she planned it all. Her escape, her comeback, and now, her peace. We didn't rush into a wedding. We took our time, built a home with sunlight and laughter. I kept painting, now with color again. No more gray, no more muted tones. Even Calvin joked that my art had finally caught up with my soul. Every brushstroke was a whisper of freedom. Every canvas said she finally left the life that tried to cage her. And now she paints not to escape, but to celebrate. Sometimes the past still haunts me. A song, a scent, a courtroom flashback. But I don't shrink anymore. I breathe through it, because my silence was my answer to a life that tried to mute me. And now, I speak when I want. I choose joy, not out of naivety, but out of resilience. I earned this happiness. I bled for it. I buried the old me so the new one could rise. And she did. Stronger, louder, free. One day, I found the old folder from the trial. Those documents that turned everything around. I thought I'd burn them, but I kept them. Not out of bitterness, but as a reminder of the woman who stood up in court and said he never saw it coming, of the warrior who walked through fire and came out dressed in her power, of the girl who once said I was nothing to him and then became everything to herself. Michael never tried to be my savior. That's why he became my partner. There's a difference. He stood beside me, not in front, never silenced my story, never told me to move on faster. He understood that revenge doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers through joy, through rebuilding, through living well after being left for dust. He held my hand, not to lead me, but to walk with me, step by step. Calvin passed a few months after the wedding, peacefully. I held his hand, and he whispered, "I always knew you'd win." That moment, I'll carry it forever, because when she was captured, they said she was done. But that girl, she became the woman who turned the courtroom into a stage and her life into a masterpiece. And now, I teach other women. I share my story, because stories of betrayal deserve to be told and transformed. And as I close this chapter, I look out the window, the sunlight pouring in, and I whisper to myself, he thought I would stay, but I didn't. I rose, I fought, I won. And what comes next? That's not his story anymore. It's mine.